Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending when you're watching this. We are going into the final section of the read portion. So I'm excited to go down this path of deviant careers with you. So as we're getting going here, let's get kind of talking about this and all this good stuff, right? So let me quickly just get this all going. So for some, it may feel like a long time and a lot of readings. And for some, it may feel like this came quickly. I always find it interesting to see how different people subjectively perceive time in summer courses, but nonetheless, the final lecture provides us last recaps of our readings in this course. And this week, we will be analyzing the deviant career. Goffman calls the idea of deviance with inside careers. It's a really powerful concept. And look at deviance from a career perspective. So how a person enters the deviant world, how they are trained and socialized to grow in their position, and ultimately how people are able to, if possible, exit deviance, that is, leave. So without further ado, let's just jump into it, shall we? And kind of cover the topics that we're going to be covering here, right? So without further ado, as I said, let's jump into it. While most burglaries are committed, we're going to be talking about this chapter, by young, poor men, these demographics do not provide the full story, and Wright and Decker aim to find motivations for becoming a burglar. In almost all cases, decisions to commit a residential burglary arises in the perceived pressing need for cash. Cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money, right? More than 90% of offenders in the study sample report, they broke into dwellings because they needed the money. Most would not offend if they had enough cash to meet their current expenses. Most offenders did not save money they got from the burglaries, but used it for one of three purposes, and that is to keep the party going, to keep up appearances, or to keep themselves and their families fed, clothed, and sheltered. Now, let's start with keeping the party going. So for keeping the party going, nearly 75% of the sample reported using money from the burglary for high living, most commonly for drugs, especially crack cocaine. For keeping up appearances, 45% of those who committed burglaries for money reported using the cash to purchase status items such as clothing, primarily to project an image to others on the street. About 50% of the sample said they paid bills with money from the burglary, which fits in with the category of keeping things together. However, bills were often badly delinquent since offenders avoided paying them as long as possible, even when they had the cash in order to buy the drugs. And others, spontaneity is a prominent feature of street culture, and many offenders displayed a tendency to live for the moment, right? YOLO. Wright and Decker found that the immediate need for money was driving force for most offenders in the sample. The lack of legitimate means for money existed even for those who had jobs, as they saw little hope of getting money legally. Very few in the study committed burglaries for other rewards, such as excitement or the risk of the situation or adrenaline junkies, right? So it ended up being kind of stuff that you kind of think, but it's interesting when you break it down of why people committed these burglaries. Now, pulling into the next conversation from Witzel and Schumann is the idea of social smokers. I find this chapter super interesting. The article on social smokers is the paradox of the social smoker is they often view themselves as non-smokers, but tend to find allies amongst habitual smokers. They move in and out of passing as either habitual or non-smokers. They do not belong in one fixed category, which destabilizes the idea of a strict smoker / non-smoker binary. The authors did in-depth interviews and observations with college students in the Midwest. Surprise, surprise, in the Midwest. The findings are that social smokers provide social outlets of solitary work, and that the social smokers align themselves with non-smokers as opposed to habitual smokers. Not having cigarettes is the hallmark of the social smokers. They prefer to bum them from others, but they seldom reciprocate and they're not carrying a lighter is another hallmark of being considered a social smoker, which aligns better with the non-smoker than the habitual one. Also goes with the great joke, oh, you want my lungs too, right? The irony is, and I always bring this up in class, smoking circles are an interesting sociological space. There are few spaces in the adult world where social stratification doesn't exist. Rich, poor, minority, majority, or anything in between, you will find solidarity of the spoiled identity shared in this circle. A strange and interesting in and out group dynamics of acceptance under the knowledge of the social stigma adhered to by the act of being a smoker. Something to think about. No matter where you come from, no matter your story, no matter your circumstances, right? Social smokers will let you in as long as you're a part of their deviant circle. Interesting, right? Just a little TLDR for me. But going from there, let's talk about the next article here, right? The next article focuses on the mechanisms employed by pimps to lure women into prostitution and eventually into obligatory relationships that support the pimp's lifestyle. Now, a pimp is someone who controls the actions and lives of the proceeds of one or more women who work the streets. They call themselves players, which are pimps. The game is their profession, and the life is the context of the subculture. The pimping game requires strict adherences to the rules. To have game implies that pimps have a certain amount of charisma and smooth talking, persuasive conversation toward women, right? The paramount rule is that pimps must get paid. Another rule, the game, is sold, not told, right? This is done through persuasive conversations. The final rule is a pimp must have a woman or women that want to see him on top. Now, some terms for you to learn. Mac or max are the most well-respected pimps. Players are the average stable of women, right? They're not really max, they're just players. Well-respected and make a good living, but they're not max. And then we have the tennis shoe pimps. Have one or more prostitutes on the streets. The article describes pimp-controlled prostitution as an enterprise or career. For instance, in turning a woman out or having her become a prostitute, the pimp may offer a hope for a future and an opportunity to be fiscally and financially successful. Now, there is another term for you to learn here, which is called a thoroughbred or thoroughbreds. Women who learn the game and become proficient in playing. They are professionals in the prostitution ring and are responsible for maintaining market rates. Women can be enticed away from another pimp, which is viewed as a common part of the free enterprise of the pimp game. The more corporate the pimp, the less likely women describe feelings of love or defining interactions as a relationship. The pimp can never let clout or love cloud his judgment concerning business first, right? On exiting the deviant career, many factors prevent women from pursuing legal assistance, including that of often fear, imitation, love for the pimp despite abuses, buying into the pimping game and blaming herself for violating it, reluctance to report violence due to prior existing of inaction of the law, so feeling like no one's going to help them anyway. When it came to the customer complaints, right? So women who do leave are often considered escaping the game. So it's interesting to start looking at how even something that we know culturally through representations of hip hop music and other normal social colloquialisms, but there are rules. And this is what this chapter is really looking at, is that pimps lure women into prostitution. There's rules to the game, and it must be pimp controlled. So it's fascinating to kind of see this as an enterprise, not just a deviant street behavior. Now, let's look a little bit into one of the chapters by the authors of this book, which is that of Adler and Adler, The Careers of Drug Traffickers. Now, this next, as I mentioned, this next article of the textbook is by the editors of the book, Adler and Adler, and it looks at marijuana and cocaine trafficking in the United States. The high-level dealers pursued drug trafficking as a full-time occupation. If involved in other businesses, they were usually maintained to provide them with a legitimate front for security purposes. And smugglers and dealers at this level banded together. Despite gratifications originally derived from easy money, material comfort, freedom, prestige, and power, 90% of those observed decided to quit the business. Now, this stemmed in part from the initial perceptions of the career as temporary. However, they were rarely successful in making it legitimately because they failed to cut down the extravagant lifestyles and drug consumption. Many abandoned efforts to reform and return to deviance anyway, sometimes picking up where they left off, and other times shifting to new models of operation. Not that dissimilar from actual real world, right? Now, examples included switching from dealing cocaine to dealing marijuana, or shifted roles within the same group of traffickers. A serious phase-out and re-entries combined with a career shift endured for years. Once established in the drug world, dealers and smugglers entered a middle phase of aging in a career, which is aging out, similar to the real world, and overstimulation and exhaustion results in the process of burning out, not that dissimilar from normal work, right? While different strategies and approaches were used to phase out the career, this was often temporary, and it represented another stage of the drug careers. Re-entry into the drug world occurred, and especially when the person did not leave on their own, but were rather busted out. Now, returning from bust outs usually entailed a trial period where they had to reestablish trust and reliability. Voluntary reentry involved an easier process. If you left on your own, it wasn't that hard to get back in, but if you got in trouble, they needed to make sure you were no snitch, right? In any case, While reentering, many underwent a career shift, right? And became involved in some new segment of the drug world. Now, we're going to go into the final chapter of this read and the final chapter that you'll have read in this class. In the final article of our course, Howard analyzes obstacles to exiting emotional disorder identities and discusses the impact of becoming de-labeled. This study explores subjective self-meaning of those identified with emotional disorders labels and who no longer do, called delabelers. The author conducted interviews with about 40 individuals who formerly identified with a range of emotional disorder labels such as anorexic, codependency, bipolar, agoraphobia, as well as those who had been a part of Narcotic and Alcoholic Anonymous, right? The narratives offer insights into the changing subculture meaning of disordered identities over time, as well as their exit from such labels. The authors found existential, interactional, and cultural obstacles to exiting or disidentifying with the label. Several delabelers went through a period of questioning, who am I now, right? After deciding to disidentify with the label. Disidentifying from emotional disorder labels doesn't involve adopting a new label or label status. Instead, the transition moves from existing individuals from a highly marked, culturally recognized status to a completely unmarked non-identity. It required forfeiting known identity, which can be destabilizing for most. Disassociating with a group identity, such as support groups, can trigger feelings of guilt, fear, which are associated with issues of loyalty to the group. A deserter complex results from considering leaving a group, and it then is reverse stigmatization, which is a powerful concept to think about, right? So usually you're worried about adhering a stigmatized label or receiving stigma, but leaving and trying to get away from a stigmatized group can also revert in reverse stigmatization, and is applied for fear of being ostracized by the group for choosing to disidentify with labels. Delabelers are also described as delabelers also described cultural pressures to remain identified as disordered. The narrative reflects a cultural trend, assuming that the label is needed in order to understand and cope with life's difficulties. A term that is powerful that is used by Howard in the study is that of identity void, which I think is a powerful statement made, right? By delabeling, we gain an identity void. Interesting concept, something to think about. Additionally, to attach more last-minute layered dynamics, think of those who are recovering addicts. Most will say once an addict, always an addict, and will refer to themselves as I am recovering addict for X amount of years, and this is part of me. If you were to stop wanting to be labeled as an addict, you would face this identity void and reverse stigmatization and be viewed as a delabeler. Powerful to think about that. Why do you have to maintain a label if it's no longer how you represent yourself, right? So essentially, this brings you to the end of my course with the read section. You still have to watch the other work and take your exam, but that's it. And that's the end of this read section for this course. Once you have finished your readings, your posts, and all that good stuff, you'll have your exam and you'll be done. And I hope you've enjoyed this course. Heck, I sure love teaching it, and I hope this has brought you some understanding, some knowledge. And I just wanted to take a quick moment here, not to waste your time, and say thank you for watching these, reading this chapter, taking this class. It's a powerful, hard-hitting topic. The chapters are not easy to read at times. I hope you've really gained some insight into what deviance is. And remember, it's cool to care. It's also fascinating to study and understand what goes bump in society. Because if you go where the wild things are, then you know how the wild things really are, right? I look forward to reading your submissions, papers, and I hope you enjoyed the class. Thank you.